So welcome, Hayley, to HomoTime. Yeah, we'd love to hear more about, your background, about you and how you got into this type of work.
Absolutely. Hey, everybody. I'm glad that you all are here to join us and the folks that are watching virtually on Homoground's Patreon. Excited to have you here too at a later date. As Casper mentioned, my name is Hayley Rosenblum. I've been working in this space in community building and fan engagement for a very long time. I started as a teenager on message boards, getting, in participating in community in my own way as a youth, and somehow turned that into a career. So just a little background of my career achievements, I suppose we can say. I started working for musician artist Amanda Palmer in 2009 as part of an intern in her management team. Essentially, I was a fan that she placed in her manager's office because I understood the non-traditional way that she operated with her fans and community, where a traditional music manager didn't. And so that slowly grew into me becoming one of three team members on her independent career. She left her record label and started doing things independently and began her crowdfunding internet platform journey with me on that team. So I've been from the ground up of all these new spaces. For a period of time, I left working with Amanda full time and started working at Kickstarter in 2013, where I was their first music specific hire. So I was brought in to join a small team that focused on different creative fields. So as you may know, Kickstarter, you can do movies, film, comics, writing, all sorts of creative disciplines. And so I basically helped develop a lot of the best practices that we know and kind of think are obvious today in that crowdfunding space of how does a musician use Kickstarter. Many folks may know Amanda Palmer from her record-breaking Kickstarter campaign, which to this day is still the largest, most successful independent original music project on Kickstarter. So she had about 25,000 fans raise or pledge, I should say, about $1.2 million in support of an independent album and art gallery tour and big, ambitious creative project. I left Kickstarter in 2016 and then rejoined Amanda's team, where she started using Patreon as her main source of income, completely independent in the music world. And we use Patreon to release approximately, usually it's about 2 to 3 independent art releases each month, but we launched a podcast in September that comes out weekly. So it's been a lot, a lot of content, a lot of posts. But my expertise really comes from connecting fans to the artist and connecting communities to each other. And it's the, what is it, the bread to my butter kind of thing. Like you can sell an album, you can sell a t-shirt, but why are people interested in those things? And it's the fundamental roots of what your art means to people and why they want to connect with you on it. So my goal for our chat today is to inspire all of y'all to think about what you're creating or what you may want to create and how to navigate these times right now where most of our worlds are digital. Like, this is amazing that we can chat on a screen virtually because you all are located in many different places around the world. And that makes this information so much more accessible, because previously we would have these talks in person. And if you're not in New York, where I am, you may not have access to this information. So I'm really excited about this opportunity. If anybody ever wants to reach out to me, just to kick this off, I'm at Hayley Fiasco on all social media. And if you want to reach out, I have an email button in my Instagram that you can always reach out and say hello. Famously, I say I can give anyone 20 minutes of my time in a consultation type of way, because I really believe that access to this information should be available. And I don't believe in charging people to consult them on how to raise money. So you're welcome to drop me a line if you have a specific project or question that we don't get to today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Haley, for that introduction. I'm so excited to dig in a little bit more, especially maybe talking more on the independent musician front, where we have musicians who stated they were just starting out, or maybe have a smaller audience than somebody like Amanda Palmer. Um, And also, I think I forgot to really introduce myself to everybody here. So just to get that out of the way, if you've been here before, my name is Dee. My pronouns are they, them. And I do want to acknowledge that I am hosting this chat on Massachusetts land. And with that, let's get right into it. So, Hayley, you've been doing a lot of stuff and you just covered how you kind of got into the music thing, but I wanted to also ask you, are you also a musician? Like before you started working for Amanda Palmer, like what really got you into this world of creativity? And then just like what makes you invested in the creative world?
When I was like a kid, I ached to learn how to play guitar, and then I got a guitar, and this was like 2000, 2001, and like you had to, those inkjet printers where you download guitar tabs and it took like a year to print a thing. And then I discovered forums around the same time, and I used to joke and say that if it wasn't for the internet, I'd be a better guitar player, because I ended up spending a lot more time engaging with fans of the same bands I liked. So I don't consider myself a musician. And for a longest time, I didn't consider myself an artist, which was a very complicated feeling for me, because I felt like I am a person who supports artists and I help artists. I'm not an artist, but I have all this creative spirit and energy. And what does that mean? And so, as Casper mentioned earlier, I do concert photography, and I've shot a bunch of shows for Homoground, which you can see some sets on the website. And that's my way of connecting my passion and love for art and for supporting music and being at live shows with what's uniquely my take and my authorship. So when you're in a supportive role for artists, your name is not on the work that you're helping create. Maybe it's in a liner note somewhere or a thank you from stage, and that's beautiful. But having something that's my creative direction in this space, which is my photography, has been very meaningful for me. But as a music fan, I care a lot about the artists I support and the artists that I love. And that's why it's driven me to help artists understand the fan point of view and to help fans understand the artist's point of view in some regard. And that's where the community building part comes in. And that's why that passion has kind of steered me in this direction.
Thank you so much for clarifying that. And I'm so glad to understand more that you're coming from the fan point of view, because on the musician point of view, we're just like, at least for me, I don't know how you all feel, but I had a very hard time wondering how my people who were listening to my music or coming to my shows were really consuming what I was, doing performance wise or with merch. Like, what did people want as merch? What did people want as a show? And self-funding a lot of projects is expensive when you're not really like a big time person and you're just doing it for the love of it. So maybe that would be a good jumping off point for the bands that you liked supporting, or like, with, and this connected with the knowledge of fundraising or, supporting those musicians. What were things that really helped you connect with an artist as a fan, and kind of helped you follow along on that artist's journey and get invested? And then maybe we can talk about connecting that to fundraising later on.
Absolutely. Just taking a quick step back is like considering, like I consider everything I do as a role of a liaison, right? I am the liaison of the fans to my boss, the artist. I'm the liaison of the fans and the artist to the platform that we use. I have experience in being a representative of the platform. So I've been in almost every role of this sort of trifecta of crowdfunding and online audience building. And so that informs, I know how the magic is made. So for artists that have pulled me in, I mean, it started as like a teenager, you have teenage angst and all the stuff is going on in your life that's hard to deal with. And then I would just like put headphones on, listen to music and chat about the songs with people on the message boards, and then, start administrating and moderating those message boards. And so the fan community was a big thing that drew me in. And when I was a teenager, I liked music that sounded good, as most teenagers do. I'm embarrassed to admit, but when I was a teenager, young teenager, my favorite band was Weezer. And I was like, this music is so catchy and it's so great. And the fans were like sardonic and hilarious and bitter, and it was great. And then I discovered a band whose music spoke to me in a way that was much deeper, where it wasn't just about songs that sounded good. It was music can literally change your life. And that's something that I hold very dear, because I know that when I'm like working really hard and exhausted and stressed out and whatnot, I know that this music is getting to the hands and the ears of people who need it. And so I've gone to concerts where I watch the signing line where Amanda will sign autographs at the end of the show, and I see people bawl and break down just being able to say thank you to her for the work that she does. And that's what this is literally all about for me. It's getting something to the ears of a fan who needs it, who wants it. When we buy a concert t-shirt, it's not that we have bought a commodity. It's that we have bought a memento that reminds us of a very special thing, whether it's the concert itself, the experience with your friends, if you're going in a group, whatever it is, it means more than just the merchandise. And so threading that into the larger conversation of how to fundraise or how to connect with an audience, it's thinking about why are your fans, your audience, why are they there and what do they want and why do they want it? I've spoken on many panels in the music industry and conferences over the years, and a lot of the conference, they have panels like, how do you monetize your fans? And I'm sitting on stage mostly with white men who are older than me being like, so consumers, this and that and the other. I'm like, you're calling fans consumers? What the fuck? Because I think of it as community. It's like, when you listen to an album, anyone here who likes music, when you listen to an album, why are you putting that album on? Why are you paying money to go see an artist live? Why are you subscribing to a audio service to listen to songs without commercials? You don't want commercials, that kind of thing. So it's all connected into, why do you connect with the art that you love? And that means if you're a musician, you're a filmmaker, you're a writer, you're an artist, why are people going to connect, or how are they going to connect with you? And I think most often artists, like the project that you're knee deep in or neck deep in, because often artists devote so much time and love and passion to their work, means something to you. And soon it's going to mean something to whoever is listening or reading or watching it. And it's facilitating that bond between the viewer, listener, reader, and yourself, and giving those folks an opportunity to connect with what you're making and working on, and remembering that you've been spending maybe 2 years working on this magnum opus, this beautiful thing, but they're going to discover it for the first time on an email blast, a social media post, word of mouth, a commercial on another podcast, whatever it may be. And how do you describe how important this is? How do you say you should pay attention to this? Like, these are really important questions, and there's no like set answer to it. And a lot of people will say, pay me money and I'll get it. You want a playlist? And it's like, but who's listening to that playlist? Do you want a lot of eyes and ears, or do you want the right eyes and ears? Because if Homoground makes an amazing podcast episode and I'm like dancing in my kitchen doing my dishes, I want to tell my friends about this episode, right? Because it's good. If I'm reading an article or a book that really captivates me, I'm going to post about it on my social media. And so it's thinking about, how do you get your art to the people that are going to love it? And the big thing about that is the onus is not just on you to share and to get the word out. And if you're doing a crowdfunding campaign or membership platform, it's not just on you to share it. Like, if you watch a show on, let's say, Netflix or whatever streaming service, and you love it, you're going to speak about it, right? You're going to tell the people about it. So your fans in your community, or your friends, people who love and support you, they can also share and be influential about getting more folks on board with what you're doing.
Wow, you really make a good point about that sort of personal connection. And I think as queer musicians, for me being like a baby, when I was starting out performing a few years ago, so I had a non-binary band or duo, more aptly called FBGM, that I performed in. And it was just, we only started really performing to be able to book shows and pull other queer bands, because it's a lot of work to build shows and to get the bill going, and a lot of emailing. It's an incredible amount of emailing. we wanted to make sure that people were listening to this stuff, because I was personally tired of going to venues and seeing the same bro dudes, playing the same songs about how some girl didn't call them back, or how, they got blocked on Instagram. Like, that wasn't resonating with me. I wanted the queer musicians to be in community with me. So, um, and I sort of shared the same sentiment as HT, where I was like, I'm really bad at playing guitar and writing songs, but I don't care. I'm just going to do it. And I think that's the artist side of me, where I just felt compelled to be shitty on stage, because if a white dude can be shitty on stage and sound like crap and people are loving it, I'm like, hell yeah, I'm going to do that too. And what ended up happening is, one of my favorite shows was 3 people came to this show. It was like the most poorly, like it just feels, I don't know if you've all ever had that experience, if you've ever performed, where it's just like someone's mom and the person who drove you and like the coffee shop provider. And I love those shows, because then I had a beautiful moment where it was two, like a mom and a dad were like the only people I didn't know in the audience. And at the end of our set, they came up to me, and I talked a lot about mental health and being queer and navigating my gender experience and how weird and awkward it is. And I'm, in my 30s. And they came up to me and told me, like, we have a trans daughter who's 16. And it was just so great to hear somebody talk about being trans on stage, because we rarely get to hear that. And we just popped into this coffee shop to get a coffee, and we stayed because we walked in right when you were talking about that. And that was like making a fan right there. And they just continued supporting, like got on my email list. So even if you think your project is not up to whatever bar, I'm going to say, if you are queer, or regardless, like whatever community that you are in, you are an individual voice and storyteller. You have a very unique point of view that will resonate with somebody. And I also like thinking about how a song can save a life. Like you were talking about Weezer. I loved this one band that didn't exist anymore by the time I found them on LimeWire. And that band saved my life, So that one song that you maybe wrote that you're scared to put it out. That might really resonate with somebody. And that's how I feel like I started building a baby community of like friends and other queer people, and just people who didn't know how to talk about the things I was talking about. Yeah, to that, just wanted to speak to that, maybe of like how gaining fans happened. So yeah, moving on from that, you started talking about, fundraising and all that stuff. Like, I want to talk about like, all right, once you've got like maybe your one fan or your friends or your family, and say you want to put out a vinyl, or you want to, nobody's going on tour right now, or like you need equipment or anything, what would you suggest would be a good place to have everybody hang out? I know Brett kind of spoke about this a little bit with the Patreon, where you feel like you're just megaphoning and telling people stuff, but there's no real place for people to kind of talk to each other. We don't really have these forums anymore. So with Patreon, maybe, or with anything, what's your advice, maybe on that, being on the forefront with somebody who's been the biggest earner on these platforms?
So with Patreon in particular, they have a lot of different third-party applications you can integrate with, which are amazing to kind of make up for their shortfalls with community tools. So for example, Discord is a chat app that you can make a perk for your patrons. They have something called Discourse, which is a forum application you could also make as a perk. They also have an integration with Crowdcast, which is a webcasting platform that allows you to gate access by tier or all patron. And so I recommend, if you're using Patreon, to kind of take a look at those tools just to get some inspiration of what to do. But at the end of the day, it's very much like general social media best practices. It's like, what platform are you using and why? What's the goal? If the goal is to get people to converse with each other, then you may want to start thinking about how you do that. So for example, like something super easy could be, let's say you're making a new t-shirt and you may know what color shirt it's going to be. You may know or you may not, but you could say to your Patreon or your Facebook or wherever you're communicating as the megaphone, hey, which color should I print? Would you wear this? And then, you can see people start interacting, and they'll interact with you, but then they'll start interacting with each other depending on what the prompt is. So like you can even ask like, what's the coolest band shirt you own? And so if I write in and say, well, when I was 14, I bought this sweet Weezer shirt, D might come in and say, I had that one too, and I can't find it. And then Casper can come in and say, oh, I just saw this on Depop or eBay or whatnot. So it's thinking about what kind of questions to ask folks that's going to stir that conversation with you and each other. You can also do that about your own artwork, or if you're working on a project and you have like a deleted scene from a video clip or a film, or writing, if you have a draft that you want to, anything that can have a polarizing opinion. And I don't mean like polarizing in an offensive way, but I mean people having really strong opinions about stuff. People will interact and be like, I love this too, or I dislike it too. So it's thinking about what kind of prompts to throw that way to people. There's also interesting ways to get folks to collaborate with each other. So it's like, I've seen fans collaborate on sharing a journal, where you write a journal piece and you send it off to the next person, or thinking about initiatives to get people to collaborate on a playlist. That might be really neat, because they can then talk to each other in the comment section, whichever platform you're using, about songs people are suggesting. So just thinking about what to ask people that's going to spark conversation all around.
That's actually right when you said that, I was just remembering, you have friends who are creative too. A great way to build community is to collaborate with those friends. So, for example, if you're touring or making a show or doing some sort of hosting something online, asking your friend who's really good with Photoshop to make the flyer for you. And then they, when you work with them, like that's already a connection. And then their friends who like their art is like, oh, who's this musician you're hanging out with? Or who's this videographer? Or, yo, I'm really interested in this event. I know, sorry to put you on the spot, Dalen, but I feel like I'm part of your community. I love that you host these random movie nights on the weirdest, freaking obscure, random movies that you run into, and you're like, I need to know what this is about. And then we get to all chat and hang out together. And I just like meet random people. And I love that. So like that, even random stuff like that is awesome. And maybe a great way to build community. Like, yo, I'm hosting it. Like it's on Instagram, I think, when you post the invite and you're like, hosting this event, found this weird movie, gotta get to, gotta get to the bottom of this. Can y'all suffer with me?
It goes a long way too to suggest that people connect with each other. I mean, we're not doing live events so much now, but if you told people, hey, if you show up early, chat with each other on the concert line, or if you're holding a digital space like this, and you like, before we started recording, it was great. We had folks in attendance introduce each other and introduce themselves. And so it's that kind of space of giving people the ability to say, hi, this is me. Other folks can come in and say, oh, I saw you doing this thing, or whatever. It's kind of opening the floor up to the people you're going to interact with in the community spaces that you're talking about.
Yeah. And also like with Felix talking about film, I've collaborated with other like cinematographers, or even like, specific. There's a local cinematographer here who specializes only in ballet dancing, and collaborated with him to make a video, and that had kind of sparked this whole mini community of photographers, videographers, and other musicians. We all collaborate with each other, or we'll like email each other once in a blue moon and be like, hey, I'm doing this video, can you send me a song? And then again, that kind of sparks people talking with each other, maybe on my band page or on their movie page or director page. It also helps me find the right people for me to collaborate with my project. So if you are working on a music video and you want footage of only queer people, you could probably hit up Felix and be like, hey, you know what? You have a connection with the trans community. I'm trans. I only want to hire trans people. That I think that's a great way to maybe also just start building community and fans.
Absolutely.
So
and you bring up a good point too, because again, this is thinking more of in-person events, but like if you're performing a show in that bar with 3 people and you're selling your own merch and there's another band on the bill next to you selling a merch, it's like, introduce yourself to everybody, because you never know who you may need in that networking capacity. Or like, yo, you're doing this film and you need this grungy metal ambient noise. I know just the person, like it's that kind of thing. Whereas once you say what you do and who you are to everyone around you in the field that you're working in, the more that you can kind of get the help and collaborators in the connect and network and build the community, especially like in the queer community. You want to give opportunity to people who are generally not getting those opportunities for different visibility reasons and whatnot. So anytime you can elevate folks, that's amazing. It's definitely amazing.
Yes, highly recommend talking to your fellow queer musicians, following them on Instagram. If you don't have the money to buy their stuff, even just reposting their music. I know I have a dog walking podcast that I will use Dalen's music sometimes with the dogs walking. And I like to do that because people love dogs. And it's like introducing queer musicians to a whole random audience that hopefully maybe out of like the random people that are watching me do dog walks, they'll connect and also become a fan. So I hope that was maybe helpful for all of you in terms of maybe figuring out how to build community. But I do want to take a moment to maybe open up the floor before we move on to the fundraising part, to ask if anybody has any questions or like, oh, you didn't quite really hit on this one thing that I'm interested about. So does anybody have any questions? Or are you like cool moving on to the money part? Yeah, we good? All right. Dylan, says good? Or what has a question?
I have a question.
Oh, okay. Go for
It's
it.
like, I'm sorry if you don't mind my jumping in.
It's okay.
It's like all of that was super helpful. And this is probably maybe overly technical, but I always choose my words really specifically. Like, it's funny because Patreon often says like, when you're asking people to join, like avoid words like support or things like that. And so I'm curious, like when like when a fan is obviously engaged and I'm personally engaging with them, when it's time to be like, hey, why don't you join my mailing list? Like, why don't you join my Facebook group? Why don't you join my Patreon? Like, what's the best kind of language for that? Like, I mean, I think that some of them are in it genuinely just to support me, because a lot of them just give me money and never engage, which makes me sad, but whatever, I'll take it. But I'm curious, like, do you say like join the community, support me, get instant access? I feel like different things work with different people. I never know what to go with first.
What a wonderful question, because let me just say that Patreon is a company. And they'll have their own style guide and branding guide and just their own decisions about what words they want to be associated with. You are an artist. You know your community, you know your fans, you know your friends. And the words that feel good for you are different than what feel good for a platform. The funniest example is at Kickstarter in 2013, when I was first there, you wouldn't have found the word crowdfunding anywhere on their website. And it was a word that was like dirty. We wouldn't say it. And now it's like in the dictionary, and like you have to embrace it because it's part of our culture. And so, because they're an arts platform, right? They're not a money platform. So these platforms, they have different best practices for different reasons. It's also worthwhile considering who is using those platforms and why. So Patreon has podcasts, they have fine art, they have what they call not safe for work art. So let's just put that to the side for a second, right? So now going to the actual question, it's like the way Amanda Palmer approaches this is in every piece of content or art, because I don't like calling art content, but on the internet it is. So every music video, everything that we release, let's say we upload to YouTube, to Bandcamp, to wherever, at the end we'll say this work was made possible by X number of patrons, join the community link. And so instead of saying, please join the Patreon to support my art, like as a proactive way to get people in, we kind of thank people who are in, and that motivates people to come on board. So maybe in a fundraising sense, it's like, thanks to all these awesome donors, contributors, supporters, what would people call like the ground, whatever like words people use, like initial supporters. Like I've heard so many ways of people saying, just say thank you to the people being a patron. Patronizing, that's not the right word, but you know, you can say, hey, support my work. The dollar you throw in this month is enabled me to make more art that I can upload for free on the internet, so it's accessible to everybody. The way, this isn't exactly a question, and I know you know because you're in our world, supporting Amanda and Amanda supporting you back. It's that thank you. It's that you're making this possible, and we're not going to paywall the content, the artwork. Everybody gets access to it, but people feel good enabling its existence. They feel good being part of the community. They feel like it's a fan club, but they're not necessarily getting more than the average or any other person. Like, even for the folks who don't know who Amanda Palmer is, you have access to the same amount of art as Brett, who is a patron of Amanda's. You know, so it's just framing it in language that feels good to you. And this might be a question that we're going to get to, but I'm just going to jump into it because everyone asks this. The question I'm about to say, everyone. I've talked to literally thousands of musicians and artists. They go, but I don't want to beg for money. How do I ask for money? And I say, and this I know is kind of, it's not trivializing, but it could be thought of. So don't beg, just ask. It's only begging if you think it's begging, and beg. Simply asking, if I say, hey, Brett, can I have $5 for this cup of coffee? I'm in New York, it's $5. You'll be like, okay, yes. Or you'll be like, no, not today. If you say no and I go, but please, I want $5. That's begging because someone has said no. Asking is giving someone the opportunity to say no and saying, it's okay. Even if you might be like, damn, I just want those $5. But you don't press upon it. It's just, okay, this is so cliche, and I always say this, and I think when I was chatting with Dee and Casper, I mentioned it too, because I'm always thinking about it. There's this Regina Spektor lyric that I'm about to butch that says, if you don't say your name out loud, how can anyone ever ask you by it? If you don't tell people that you have a crowdfunding campaign or you're working on a project, how do you expect people to know about it? And with the internet, there's all these algorithms. So if you post something on Facebook today, there's no guarantee that I'm going to see it tomorrow. On Twitter, I know now there's more algorithms, but if you post it on Twitter today at 2:05 a.m., how am I going to see it at 9 p.m., right? And so this idea of everyone's not reading your entire Twitter feed. Everyone is not reading your entire Facebook feed. Everyone's not reading every patron post you post. And I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news. They're not. And so there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, pre-order my new album here. Or a music video is coming out tomorrow. You can pre-order it here. Or if you're using those pre-save links for digital services. And it's just telling people what you're working on. And instead of asking for money or asking for support, tell people how to support you. Yeah. And so it's figuring out what language feels good for you. It's figuring out the cadence and the frequency that feels good for you. It's like if your friend sends you an email, it's like, cool. Like my friend sent me an email, but if they send you an email every single day, it might be like, I can't keep up with this. This is too much. So figure out what feels good. And then if you have a community, you can ask them. This goes back to that feedback question. It's like, hey, am I posting too much? How would you like me to share this info? Should it be a newsletter? Should I post it to Patreon or Facebook or whatever? So we're all humans. We're learning this in real time, especially with the pandemic. A lot of us are learning to use these digital tools in new ways. And even just asking a friend, being like, hey, Brett, like, am I asking for coffee too much? Am I posting too much? Like, you'll tell me, right? And you'd be like, Hayley, you're great. Keep doing what you're doing. Or you'll be like, Hayley, I would do it a little less. Great. You have to have a little bit of a thick skin to take criticism or feedback that may not be easy to hear, but often friends will tell you the truth. They'll tell you it like legit real. So it's helpful to have someone in your corner who can like sit down and tell you how it is if you're if you need that gut check.
Thank you so much, Hayley.
Absolutely. And thank you for the future coffee.
Anytime.
I'm not even a big coffee drinker. So it's just funny to me.
I would get you any beverage you would like, Hayley.
Thank you.
Dylan, did you want to ask something? Thank you, Hayley, for that. Now I want coffee.
Yeah, no, this is really awesome, and it's a lot of the synapses are going off that are connecting my fundraising brain and my creative brain. But one thing that it's making me think of is that in the nonprofit fundraising world, there's this big emphasis on thanking people. And specifically what I do in my role is I oversee all the thank you calls. And I can say like with confidence that the best thing about that is that I will be able to connect with a donor, a supporter, and then in just saying like, I'm calling just to thank you, suddenly a whole conversation happens about like why they care about the work, why they're engaged with the mission. And it seems like that's very similar to what you're saying with like crowdfunding, is like not even like asking all the time, but just like creating those relationships to the art making. And that's what ends up making people feel like a part of something bigger, is because they're talking about why they care. So that's really cool.
Absolutely. It's great for you too to have that intel of how someone discovered the project or the work and why it's important to them, because it can inform all these other things you're doing. It's almost like if someone put like an ad on a bus, but you don't know if it's reaching people. But if someone tells you that, oh yeah, I saw that, then you it's like that feedback is so important. And people sometimes they support you not because they want anything. They just want to support you. They want you to make what you're making and do your project. And so having that thank you, that one-on-one interaction, it's so meaningful. One of like the biggest tips for crowdfunding was like, so how do you get people to support you? And it's like the person-to-person conversation. Like we could do a show of hands of how many of you have received a Facebook message that says from someone you haven't known or talked to in years, be like, hey, how are you? So please pledge to my GoFundMe, Kickstarter, whatever. And it's because that one-on-one interaction makes you feel a little more either like personable in a positive way, or it makes you feel a little guilty if you don't, because they see you and they're looking to see if you contribute. But I would focus on the positive aspect, where if you feel recognized, you feel recognized, you're probably more likely to support again, because someone has just told you it matters. And in this world, we do a lot of things and we don't know if it matters. We like to think it does, but we don't know. So it's really nice to update folks too, to tell them why it matters. For Amanda, we have a reward tier on Patreon that's high level, and it's capped at 30 people. It's called the old school postcard tier because originally it was Amanda would write postcards to these folks, and it is what it is. We're not adding people to it, but sometimes people will drop off and a new person comes in, and then every time there's a new person, Amanda personally sends them an email, and she says, hey, here I am doing this. Tell me about yourself. Where are you? How did you hear about me and my music or my work? Like people want to tell you why they're supporting you. They want to tell you, they want to engage, they want to participate. And how good does it feel to be recognized? Even if it's $1, I highly recommend, if all of you are working on any sort of crowdfunding or fundraising, I highly recommend also contacting the folks that are chipping in at what we would call a low-level tier or low-level reward, especially now during a pandemic. Like someone giving you $1 a month or a project or whatever, that dollar could go so many places, and they're choosing to give it to you. And that means something. So this all goes to say, this is awesome to hear. Thank you for sharing that, because that makes me so excited and happy, because the connection, it's all about the connection.
Yes, thank you so much, Dylan, for that insight, because it's also reminding me of when I've supported bands. So when I mentioned earlier the band that like saved my life, they ended up getting together after 20 years, and they're all like old dads or older dads now. And I went to a show and got to meet them, and they asked me that, like, hey, how did you find our music? And I was like, LimeWire. Like, I couldn't find any of their albums, so everything was illegally downloaded. And it was really nice that they chose to do like a patron type model as well. It's they use the now defunct really crappy sort of fundraising. I think it was I'm trying to remember what that thing was called. But anyway, yeah, it doesn't exist anymore because the CEO stole the money. So.
Pledge Music.
Yes, it was Pledge Music.
But
so
I don't know that the
Music.
CEO stole the money.
Oh,
but
yeah.
it was Pledge Music that's defunct because of the financial structure of how the company would use the money. They used I just want to clarify for a little more, especially because people often are suspicious of platforms. Pledge Music, their downfall was that they were using money. They held on to the money that was raised from their bands for 30 days or some set time. And they ended up putting that money into the company, expecting to have it cycled back. So when it came time to pay out to the artists, for whatever reason, it was no longer there to pay out for the artists. And that was very not cool. But this goes to say, for the most part, these platforms are safe and they're working, but this is the internet. And sometimes maybe the best way to raise money is without giving it through a platform. But sometimes it isn't, because these platforms provide a lot of benefits that you may not be able to offer yourself. So that's kind of like a bigger caveat of research and ask your friends who have used these platforms what their experiences are like.
That's actually a really great point, because it's going to bring me to another talking point. I'm just going to do a quick time check. It's almost 4, and then I'll open it up to more questions. But I know one of the big things that you had talked to me about was keeping a mailing list in case you got to jump platforms, or like what's the most permanent way to keep your community in the know? Because we may not always have Instagram. I mean, remember MySpace? That was the place to put your music. Doesn't exist anymore. Deleted a bunch of my old, terrifyingly embarrassing music. I'm very grateful for when that happened. I don't know about y'all. But, same thing with other platforms. Facebook's probably going to die soon, et cetera, et cetera. So could you talk a little bit more about building community in a place that's more permanent than on a platform, just in case something goes down?
Absolutely. I mean, a few years ago, the biggest question was, should you have an artist website? And most people were like, nah, we got Facebook, we got whatever. But now people are going back to their own websites, because we see with algorithm changes and all sorts of internet culture changing that it literally pays to have your own space on the internet that isn't controlled by a mega conglomerate corporation that may or may not be funding or allowing white supremacy to exist and actively lobbying Congress to let them do this stuff. We don't need to get into that part, but the question actually, I mean, Amanda used to say, and still does, that her email list is gold. She is building her email list from the early days of touring in a van in the early 2000s to today. And part of the reason why it's gold is, if you express interest in my work and you give me your email address, I know that I can always contact you. Now, you may change your email address or whatnot. That's always a possibility. But if you like my Facebook artist page and I tell you, hey, Boston area folks, I'm playing a show tomorrow night, you may not see that. Facebook wants me to pay to reach all the people who have said, I want to know about Hayley, right? Because these social media platforms, they want you to do sponsored posts and advertisements and all sorts of stuff. You don't own your following. If you decide to leave Facebook tomorrow, you can't contact the people who have explicitly said they wanted to hear about you. With an email list, you can always send an email. One awesome thing about Patreon is that I can see, I operate as Amanda's, the creator account, right? Because I do a lot of back end for Amanda. I help manage the Patreon. I can see the email addresses of everyone who has is pledging to Amanda, and I can download those lists regularly and always have an ability to reach those folks if I need to. With Kickstarter, once you finish your project, so once you achieved your funding goal and the project ends because it's a set timeline, you can download the email lists. So keeping those email lists and not using them for shady marketing purposes and trading them with other people, because some people do that, not a good idea. But you want to keep your fans with you. You want to reach out. If someone says, oh, cool set, Dee, I was one of those 3 people in the audience, I want to hear more about your next show, and they give you your email address, you want to be able to reach them. So yeah, email is very important. It seems like an old, outdated technology, but it's not. You can use different email providers and keep bringing your list wherever you go. If you were to sign to a record label, perhaps, you own, and you should always own, your email list. Don't let them own it. Signing up for Dee's email list shouldn't automatically sign you up for Warner Music's Vinyl Club newsletter. You know, like you want to be able to reach your fans. You want to have that trusted voice. You want those emails to be like personal letters in the mail. And yeah, you want to own your audience.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I'm like, I'm just so, actually, when you mentioned, you know, being a part of a corporation or conglomerate that is actively supporting white supremacy or anything, like, this is a space to talk about that. And that's something that I'm very interested in not supporting, and trying to, you know, share that information with other friends of mine who are queer, who don't want to be, you know, like Spotify is a big one, you know, like being on a Spotify playlist. That's the big conversation right now, is like, where are we all moving to? We're all pushing Bandcamp pretty hard. What if Bandcamp turns out to be secretly shitty? Like, we don't know. So knowing that there is like something as simple as building an email list. Yes, Dalen just mentioned people love newsletters. I'm on Dalen's mailing list, and I love it because Dalen, she emails, I think, like once in a month. It's not even a lot, but it's enough to let me know, hey, I just released a new song, or hey, I'm just saying hi. They're really sweet, and I feel like, oh, like, I'm in the community. And if I'm not on Instagram and I miss the invite to the B movie screening or whatever, you know, I know that maybe I'll get an email or not. But the most important thing is knowing when the song is coming out and actually supporting.
Absolutely. And you as the listener or fan or whatever, you have the option to not read that email or to delete it. So with that anxiety of, am I reaching out too much? It's like, if people don't want to hear from you, they won't listen to you. So it's almost like you want to reach the people that do want to hear from you, that do want to listen to you.
Yes, thank you for that. And then now to weave all that into fundraising, before, I know there's a few questions that got put in the chat. I definitely wanted to hit upon, like, all right, you got your mailing list, you've got a baby community going, and now you're like wanting to get a vinyl out of your, you know, house music, you know, queer sad emo house track for crybabies or something, you know. But it's expensive to put out vinyl. Perfect opportunity for maybe a Patreon or fundraising. What's the best way to go about that, or how do you even decide that? Because that's my big question.
Yeah,
that's the one I sweat. I'm like, do I pull the fundraising ask for a big vinyl thing, for touring? Like, when do I freaking do this? So maybe talking about how helping a musician decide, or is it for everything? Like, what would your thought process on that be, or maybe your thoughts on that be?
Absolutely. I mean, the first thing is to hammer out, what is your project? Now, you can have, as you mentioned, multiple ideas of what avenues to go with. It could be an album and then a tour can follow, but figure out what the project is, because you need to have clear messaging. What are you telling people that you're doing? It's also budgeting. That's super, super important. And depending on what platform you use, your budgeting is going to be different for numerous reasons. For example, Kickstarter is an all or nothing platform. So if you don't reach your goal, you don't get any money. It's also a timed platform. So your campaign runs for a set amount of time. Patreon's ongoing. It can be a contribution monthly or a contribution based on your release of art. So Amanda, for example, does paid post Patreon. Every time she releases a project, she charges the patrons for that specific project. People will never be billed if she decides to take a break from Patreon, kind of thing. If you're doing something like Bandcamp, they have the Bandcamp Fridays in which artists receive 100% of the revenue raised, as opposed to any other day of the week of the month. Bandcamp will take, I believe, a 10% fee. This is all to say that you have to figure out what your budget is, and that can help you narrow down what platform you want to use. Your specific needs will also dictate what the platform is. So if you're doing a vinyl project, as you mentioned, a pre-order type of campaign works really well for that kind of stuff, because it's very clear. You need X number of dollars to make X thing. So like Indiegogo, GoFundMe, Kickstarter, that kind of stuff would work really well. If you're kind of shy about telling people how much money you need, want, or will raise, you can do different avenues of not being so transparent. I will say being transparent can help, because when I say to Brett, I want $5 for coffee, he knows where that $5 is going. And maybe if I tell him, okay, $4 is for the coffee, the $1 is a tip to the barista. Like maybe he feels better now giving me that $5 because he knows that I'm tipping the person making me the coffee. So that transparency can also be beneficial, but it's not for everyone, especially if you're working for a bigger fundraising organization. I understand that there's a lot of some political and some tape involved in that. And also thinking about what are you offering to people in response to them giving you money. With Kickstarter, it's very much a transactional type of feeling where it's like, okay, for $20, I'll give you the pre-order, I'll give you the vinyl, a physical copy. For $5, I'll give you the digital download, and so on and so forth. For Patreon, it's much different because it's an ongoing support mechanism where it's like, you know, for $5 a month, I will share all the digital demos that I'm making of that month, or whatever your thing is. So it's thinking about what you want to offer in return. You also want to think about how much time and energy you're willing to spend in those perks and rewards. Because if you just want to release an album, it may make sense for you to do a timed crowdfunding campaign that only offers the album, physical or digital, and that's it. And then in a place like Kickstarter, it's popular to do what's called stretch goals, which is, okay, you raise the $5,000 you need for the album. Now, if you raise $10,000, you can play a show in these few cities. And if you raise $15,000, you can add cities. And so people like to add more, but this is all stuff you should budget before you even promise any of that. So it's hard to give hypotheticals because it's very specific to what you're trying to do, but these should hopefully be good starting points for you to ask yourself before you dive in.
Wow, I'm like, I feel schooled. I like it. Anybody have any
classes in session?
Yeah, no, this was really helpful. Anybody have any questions in relation to that? I'm kind of like processing all that stuff. I think I have seen friends of mine do pre-orders on Bandcamp for vinyl, which is pretty cool. And I know, so for my experience with vinyl, like when it got really hip to do it, and I just wanted to do it with my bandmate. We could only afford a 7-inch with like no color, and we asked a friend to like Riso print the covers, and we just spent a night like cutting everything by hand. And that experience was just kind of like, we paid everything out of pocket, and then we decided to charge out of that budget. Like we were like, I don't care if we get the money back, we just wanted to do it. But we charged you enough for the vinyl to cover the cost, so that if we sold every single vinyl, it completely covered the cost. And we always kind of made that transparent, and that made people want to buy it more, which was cool. The other thing that my bandmate ended up doing, he has a solo project, is he was like, you know what, I'm going to do a pre-order campaign on Bandcamp to do a full 12-inch, and I'm going to charge $25 per record, and I'm only going to do a limited run. That thing sold out in like a week, and I was shocked. I was like, oh my God. But he keeps an email list. He's had a good community going for like over a decade, and people want to support. So I will say, even being upfront, and if it seems outlandish, like $25 for a vinyl, initially I'm like, no, but also it's my friend. I know how much work he puts into it. He masters everything, he mixes everything, he records everything, he plays all the instruments, he pays the visual artist, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I know where those $25 are going. He thanks everyone.
Absolutely.
And I'm more willing to give $25 whole dollars, a quarter of $100 to him, than $15 to, you know, a
the black
prefabricated,
box.
yeah, whatever.
You bring up a
So,
really good point,
yeah.
because if your band successfully did that 7-inch, fans see that you could follow through and give what you promise. And so when he does his pre-order, the people know that like this is legit. So this is also worth thinking about. If you know that you want to do some sort of crowdfunding ask or campaign, and I say ask because if you're doing a Bandcamp has a membership type of not platform, but option, if you're doing a reoccurring payment type of thing, it's an ask. If you're doing like a Kickstarter or Indiegogo or GoFundMe, that's a campaign, so it's a one-time thing. This is like the background information that some people find really helpful with Amanda, is that she under-promised, over-delivered in the Kickstarter campaign, the big one, the one that's so famous and people are like, oh my God, you raised $1 million. She lost money on that. And people go, how do you lose money on that? Because she had free shipping on international merchandise packages that had record turntables and heavy books and all sorts of like wild stuff. However, that was the greatest investment she's ever made for her career, because when she went from doing that Kickstarter in 2012, and I think she did her Patreon in 2013, I want to say 2014, something like that. People knew that they got beautiful packaged records and whatever from that Kickstarter project. And so when she launched Patreon, she immediately had 3,000 people sign up on day one. And this is before people really knew what Patreon was. And so if you are doing a small project first, treat it with so much love and care. Show people you're cutting out the artwork. Show people what you're doing. Because when you have that bigger, more expensive project, you have just built their trust and their faith in what you're doing.
I love it. Oh, this is so many gems. All right, so we've got 20 more minutes in the event, and I want to open up the floor. I know actually Casper had some really good questions, so I'm going to let them ask some questions, and then if anybody else has questions for Hayley right now, this is time to chit chat and get into it. So Casper, go right on ahead.
Yeah, so my question is around a balance of what you're offering for free versus what is paywalled. I've noticed just poking around on other people's Patreons that a lot of people that I came across had everything paywalled. So you just had to become a member to see anything. And there's a part of me, like, I don't know, the community organizer activist that is like, no, I want everything to be accessible and free for everyone. But I know, if sometimes that's not really sustainable. So I'm wondering if there's a balance, and if you are putting everything for free or a majority of the things for free on Patreon, like, does that deter people from actually paying to support it, because they can just like, why should I pay for this if it's already there for free?
This is an awesome question, because you're asking as a creative, a person who is making something, and you're thinking about it as a person who is making something. And that idea, that last part of your question, which was like, why would they pay to support it if they can get it for free, is a very reasonable question to ask as a creator making something. But if we flip the dial to Casper as the music enthusiast and fan, it makes sense why they would pay for something that anyone can have, because they want it to exist and they want to support you, and they want like what that $1 or $10 means. Or they're paying at the tier that has the shout outs in the episodes, and they get to hear their name on the virtual radio, the podcast. And so that is a great question to think about. It depends highly on what kind of content you're making. With podcasts in particular, a lot of folks will have free episodes, make it accessible to everybody, and then they'll have like bonus episodes or special clips that only patrons or only fan club members can get. So there's a nice balance of people who want more, they can pay to get more of that access. Amanda's approach is very different. And I speak of her approach because that's where I'm really deep in. Her approach is so different from everyone else. She hardly paywalls any of her art. She feels very much that the art is for everyone. But maybe she's making a demo of a song that isn't quite finished, so that she'll share with patrons only, because it's not for public consumption yet. Or she'll do special video projects that are just for them. Usually it's more vulnerable, more raw, and less polished or finished. And then there's also the what it means to support. So I know that it's different when you're a podcast that doesn't have the built-in audience that Amanda immediately has with her podcast, but her podcast has no commercials, and that's a big part of the story, where we say patrons like you are enabling us to release this without being sponsored by MailChimp, Blue Apron, what have you, right? Like those standard podcast advertisers. And that's where those thank yous come into play, where if you're letting people know what their support actually means, like by supporting this Patreon, you're allowing this creative independent. We get to play musicians that are doing such great things outside the box that commercial radio would never play. Or what Amanda really would say is like, you're enabling me to have the creative freedom without having to have Steve from marketing at a record label naysay that I'm doing this. So that means something. And that's kind of what you want to accent. You also do kind of want to create some sort of fear of missing out. And the way Amanda does that is not by saying you're not going to get access to XYZ. It's you're not part of the patron community. And that must not feel good, because it feels really nice to be part of the patron community. And so like, then you build on what Brett was getting at before, having patrons interact with each other and support each other and share their art and be in the patron only Facebook group or forum or whatever. So there's many avenues to go, but I would say I love when things are accessible to everyone, because that may provide an opportunity down the line that couldn't have been possible. Be it a musician that discovers your podcast and then shares it to their audience, and it could be a sizable audience. It could be like the young queer preteen who stumbles upon Homoground and doesn't have a credit card to contribute, but now they have just discovered some badass artists that they would never have discovered, and what that means for that person to grow up, and so on, and snowballs. So there's definitely ways to offer incentives. For a musician, we often will give patrons pre-sales. So they'll get special codes to buy tickets in advance to any concert. We're about to do a merch sale site-wide, and we're going to give patrons an extra discount on top of the general one. So thinking about perks that make people feel seen and appreciated while still making the art accessible to everybody. Because that's such an awesome thing. Like, it's not a club. It's not like an exclusive place. It's a place for everyone, because you're doing something that everyone should hear. So how can we create that sort of thank you, that bonus for being here, to make people want to be here without saying only these folks can have this? Maybe these folks can have like an extra song or an extra clip that was on the cutting room floor, or they can see the insights of how this is made, and they can have the tutorial of how do you edit a podcast, or they can have the tutorial of how do you edit these photos, which a photographer friend of mine does. They can have access to this chat right now, live in person, as opposed to the recorded version. Like, there's many different things you can do to give them exclusive access to something without taking access away. And something like this, I think, is great that it's open to the public, but it's a great example of something that like only patrons can join and ask questions, but the public can get the educational material and watch after the fact. We do that with webcasts via Crowdcast, and that's awesome because we're not taking it away from anyone, but we're giving that special moment to the people who are part of the paid community.
Emma's gonna make me cry. I just as you were saying that, he was saying that Homoground is the only person they support on Patreon. And it is true. It's with the Patreon members that we have on Homoground make it possible for us to be able to host these events for free, or host space online for the community to get together and ask these questions. And now being able for me to pay somebody to help us manage the Discord, or our social media manager, and making sure that money also goes primarily to communities of color too, and mutual aid. So I do want to take this time to talk about mutual aid just a little bit, with like what Homoground does. So I know Casper hosts Focus Time, which are these co-working sessions, and you can tip on the Eventbrite, I believe. And with that tip money, we donated to Glitz, which unfortunately had a recent issue financially with the person who's receiving the donations, which is really upsetting. It's like, it's always one thing or another in a queer community. But with that said, it's, I use my privilege to be able to help other people. And, I encourage, if you have privilege and you are a musician and you've got a good following, to think about where you can share that money to community members that may not have the same access to resources that you have. So, and that's something that I love about working with Homoground a lot, and is why I like to host. I don't, ask for a hosting fee for this. And even Hayley was really kind. We offered to pay Hayley, and I do want to be transparent to that, we'll put that back in the community. I know in the past we've done like a headphone giveaway or things like that, and we're just going to try it. And I think the people who've come to a HomoTime sometimes will be giving away something during a HomoTime to people who need it. Like, there are musicians who can't afford headphones, they're expensive, or need money to do restring something or XYZ, whatever. I do think that community can be used in that way, and fundraising can be used in that way, and
yeah, even
hiring people who need the money can
even the offer to like compensate someone's time is just amazing, because so many people want to pick your brain, and they don't say, I value the time and the resources. Like, this is exciting and fun for me, but it's also work, and it's a Sunday, and it's Passover, and there's all these reasons of things I could be doing else. But the fact that it's focused to a queer community specifically is so important, because often we're underserved of access to resources, information. And I'm fortunate enough to, like, my salary is paid by Amanda's Patreon. Like, we're successful, we're good, we're doing good. And so I don't need whatever it is, the $5 for the coffee. I don't need it. So let's put it into a place for folks that do need it, especially right now. And I encourage all of y'all to think about, a lot of projects need funding to do different things. Whether we're in a pandemic, whether there's a crisis happening for all different worthy causes, that's all true. And we can hold this all at the same time. The art and creative work is fundamental to our existence, to our happiness, to our representation, to our education, and so on and so forth. And I know I say this because a lot of artists feel guilty of saying, well, why should I ask Brett for $5? I'm gonna just keep going back. Why should I ask Brett for $5 when Brett should really give that $5 to Black Lives Matter or to the mutual aid of his community or whatnot? And the answer is like, yeah, that's a tough question during a pandemic, especially when that money is harder to come by. But art is worth it, and let your fans or supporters or patrons or whatever community decide what to do with that money. Let them tell you, I want to give you this money for this project because I want it to exist, and take that graciously. If you feel guilt, I can't tell you not to feel it, because we're all complicated beings, but understand that art has a place no matter what. Community has a place no matter what you are doing, what you're working on matters, even if it matters to only you and the 3 people in that room. Like, that child, the parents of that child is a great example. It matters in ways that are so deep. So I just want to commend everyone who is tuning in that's an artist, because your work matters. It, like you were talking, Dee, about like the music that saved your life. Well, like I mentioned Weezer being a band that I listened to as a teenager because like it sounded good, but then I discovered like bands that fundamentally saved my life too. And it's, if that record didn't exist, would I be sitting here? I mean, I would hope, but I don't know if I would be, right? It's these type of things. So yeah, I want to give all of y'all a pat on the back.
Thank you, Hayley. Yeah, and even to follow up with that, music, film, anything, audio, I do believe it's the most powerful form of art. It is an art that you can't really shut your ears off. So if you hear a song playing in a store, in a car driving by, I mean, I whipped my phone out to Shazam on a car blaring music on the speakers, like waiting for the bus. I'm like, please, I need to know who this is. But something like that, that's what keeps a movement going. that's what keeps a community going, with the pandemic, with anything horrible going. For me, at the very least, so art sustains me and keeps me motivated when I'm really pissed off, because it's just like, cool, I can listen to this like metal music or whatever that that my friends made about depression, and I'm depressed right now, but I need to keep working to do stuff. And it may seem stupid and silly, but for the musicians out there, your stuff matters, in ways that you can't even fathom. Just like I didn't know two parents of a trans teenager were going to walk into this coffee shop just randomly while me and my bandmate were just singing, and I was talking about, navigating queerness. Like, had no idea. So yes, accepting help graciously, um, is good, and also sharing when you can, when you're in a position to spread that money or to hire people to help you, that can help you, or that can give you those eyes or give you the trans visibility that you need further of. Or like, if I am ever back in my band, I would probably hit up Felix and be like, yo, I'm Latina, like I grew up in Mexico. I want to see more trans, visibility, but through a Latinx lens. I would reach out to Felix now that I know, because Felix popped in and introduced himself, to do that, and then pay him when I've got the extra cash to do that. Like, those are the things also maybe to think about with fundraising, and that whole being like, and pay the $1 to the $1 to the barista. I would pay the videographer, I'd pay the person risographing for me, or XYZ, to bring a body of work that somebody might resonate with, and it keeps them going, even if
Absolutely.
It's silly. So,
and if you don't have the funds to contribute to all of these projects, amplifying them definitely helps. And that's something I've been hearing a lot lately with some great like charity fundraising. It's like, if you don't have the money, share it on your Instagram or your social media, because someone who may have the money to contribute may discover it from that amplification. So definitely, this also is a more practical fundraising tip too. It's like, if you have a campaign or some sort of fundraising project, shout out other folks who have projects that you know of, and ask them to share yours, and try to reach multiple spaces in different communities.
Wow, my brain feels like open right now. We've got like 4 minutes left on the scheduled time. We usually are happy to run over, but I do want to open it up to anybody else who might have any questions that might have popped into your head, or if you have any comments or just want to say something, feel free. And then before that, I do want to thank all of you for coming. For the people who are Patreon supporters to Homoground, thank you so much for supporting us. If you're not Patreon supporter, this is what we offer you. We reach out to people who are experts in their field and bring that information for free to you, to help you as a creative, as a musician, and share those resources and keep that knowledge available to y'all. And we're able to do that only through Patreon, really. As Hayley said, it's a Sunday, it's a holiday, but I'm more than happy to be here. And I'm very grateful to you, Hayley, for being here and sharing your knowledge, your expertise, and to making yourself available to everybody. As mentioned, you can find Hayley on Instagram and send a message, and Hayley's happy to give you 20 minutes of time if need be. Take advantage of it. If we're queer, we're here in community. As well, feel free to join our Discord. We will email, or we will put the resources that were discussed in our Discord, and maybe in an email. But I don't know if Casper, you wanted to add anything else before opening it up?
I think you covered it all. Yeah, if anyone has any last minute questions or comments that they want to share, I'd love to hear it.
I do have one last minute recommendation for folks, especially if you're going to ask anybody about advice on this topic. Never ever write an email with the subject "quick question," because it's always quick for you to ask, but it's never quick to respond and process and take the time. Secondly, if you're going to ask anybody questions or for feedback on your crowdfunding campaign or what you're doing, ask specific questions, because it's so much more difficult to give you feedback without addressing what you specifically want to know. So you can say, is my video too long? What do you think of the video? As opposed to, here's my page, What do you think? It's good. So ask pointed questions. And even if you don't know what those questions are, it's okay to say, I don't know, but what's the 1 or 2 things that I should do? Because when I say I'll give anyone 20 minutes, you don't want to take 20 minutes for me trying to figure out what you're asking, because that is really draining and difficult to do. And also ask your friends and your community and each other, become friends with each other and ask each other questions too, because again, we're reaching out to communities. We're not just reaching out to what Hayley thinks is a good project or what Casper thinks is a good project. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Hayley. So yeah, does anybody have any questions for Hayley specifically, or want to say anything, or you good? Oh, Dalen, go right on ahead.
Oh wow, that's a perfect B. There's someone like outside honking their horn, and it's like a perfect B note. My question was sort of, maybe it's too open-ended. What's the like one thing you would recommend someone who's just starting to do in terms of building community? Because Dee mentioned the B movie thing, but that was just a Friday for me. I didn't realize I was doing anything.
I think it's really insightful to see what other folks are doing in the same space as you, and seeing how they're doing it and taking notes of what works, what feels good, what doesn't. So an easy example is if you're starting a crowdfunding page, back other people in a similar space to see what kind of updates are they sharing, what kind of rewards, and just get a sense of what's out there. It's like a little bit of research. And also ask for feedback from your trusted friends who will tell you the truth. And there's a lot of resources online, and thankfully now a lot of them are free. So like each platform has their own educational section of their website where you can learn their best practices. Some of them will host Zoom sessions or webcasts. There's a lot of talks on YouTube from their conferences and other such things, like info. Like just try to absorb as much as you can, because when you see that something works, you'll know to try it. But if you see that when something doesn't work, you'll know not to do it. And that can be just as valuable.
Also to like chime off of that, just in terms of trying different things, and also don't get discouraged if something that you try the first time doesn't work. Because, if say you try to do an event and you get a little turnout, that doesn't necessarily mean it was a bad idea or a bad event. Perhaps maybe people just couldn't attend, or had a schedule conflict. And so I think for Homoground, one thing that has been really helpful is just trying to be consistent in things, like what we've been doing with these HomoTime events, just trying to do them monthly. Now we have it like the fourth Sunday of every month. And then with Focus Time, just having that available 6 days a week. And it just gives people more of a chance to participate in things, so that you can kind of gauge, whether it's just not a good idea or if it was like a schedule thing, or.
Definitely. Yeah. Especially with the schedule thing. For me, weekends, great. During the days, there's an event going on. I'm exhausted. I walk a bunch of dogs. I'm running a 10K every single day. I got to pass out. Don't take it personal. So that's why, Dalen, I'm always if there's a movie going on and you're like, it's just a Friday night for me, that's literally the only time I'm going to be around. So Dylan, I wanted to make sure that you got your word in. I saw you raise your hand like so many times. You're like,
I just wanted to say thank you. This was really awesome. Happy Passover, Hayley. Also celebrating. And I just to the idea of like what is why should I be asking? Why is my cause? Why is my art worth it? Something that's come up recently for me is like we're in the practice of fundraising, we're normalizing asking that as long as we don't have collective care in our society, we need to rely on each other. Any way that we can normalize need with for things that matter. And so even if that person says no, like if you're doing something important just by having that ask. So yeah, I really support everything that you said.
Thank you. Thank you. I saw someone in the chat, pardon me, I forget who it was, said that Homoground was the only Patreon page that they support. But here's what's really awesome about a platform that's popular like that is the work that Homoground does to get that one supporter now has explained how Patreon works and has enabled that supporter to easily support other artists and easily find other creative causes or creative works to support. And so every time you teach someone that visibility is important, just as you said, we're normalizing the culture, we're explaining how these platforms work, and we're making it easier for our community to get more supporters as well.
I'm happy. Anybody? I'm just like really grateful to hear this. Thank you so much for that insight and talking about normalizing asking for help, because you're right, that's what community is. We're helping each other out, and yeah, as long as we are living in this weird, gross, capitalistic, white supremacist society, you know, learning how to communicate each other and also learning to also help other people and offering that help,
Absolutely.
like Casper and I and Hayley are doing, because we're able to do that. It may seem small, but it makes a ripple effect, and it's what makes the community beautiful. And also, this is queer community. Queer community, we are here for each other, and we got to build those bonds and be there for each other. And sometimes you're not able to help out, and that's cool. We'll still be here. You know, we're recording this for people who are like, I got a migraine, or I just got my vaccine, or whatever. You know, like I gotta pass out and watch the B movie instead. Like, cool. You know, we'll still be here for you to help you out if you miss this event or any sort of HomoTime. But yeah, any final words? I know we're a little over time, and I want to let y'all get back to enjoying your weekend. But Hayley, thank you so much. Really, just thank
Absolutely.
you. And thank you to all of you who showed up on a Sunday. I'm emotional inside and keeping it together because this is being recorded. So, but this makes me really feel like what we've been doing is helpful for other people. And also send us a message if you're like, yo, I hated this HomoTime, or I love this HomoTime, more of this. We want to know.
I want to return the gratitude to you. Thank you for hosting this. Thank you for everyone who submitted questions or feedback. Like, your time is valuable, and I appreciate you sharing it with us. And for the folks who are watching the recording, thanks for supporting Homoground and queer artists all over. And yeah, like, this community space is important more than ever, especially because we can't meet in person just yet. So thank you all for your time. And if you have any questions that we didn't touch upon today, just message me on Instagram. I'll do my best.
Cool. Well, I see Dalen asked what's the best, she said, what's the most preferred way of contact? So Instagram. Awesome.
Yeah, on Instagram, I have a button that you can send me an email as well. So it's a great place to follow.
Awesome. All right. Well, with that, we'll let all of you get back to your weekend. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you again. Huge hugs. Have a wonderful Sunday. Take care. Bye.